Hello and welcome to In the Skies of Love, a podcast dedicated to the classic anime series Legend of the Galactic Heroes. My name is Kamel, and I invite you to accompany me as I make my way through this classic space opera for the first time. Joining us on our voyage are our guides Tom and Joel, two diehard fans. Together we'll be reviewing and analyzing each episode of Legend of the Galactic Heroes, exploring its complex characters, intricate political machinations, and breathtaking space battles. We'll delve into the themes, symbols, and historical references that make this series a timeless classic, sharing our thoughts and insights with you as we journey through the skies of love and war in Legend of the Galactic Heroes. So sit back, relax, and join us on this epic adventure. Okay, so we're covering for this episode episodes 1 and 2 of the show.
That's right.
Which are titled. What are they titled?
The first one is titled In the Eternal Night. And the second one is
Part
titled
2 is the Battle of Astarte? Astarte. Okay. And it's sort of a two-part story, isn't it?
Yeah, I think they're kind of conjoined. It's all one
it's
running.
It's like a 110-part story, really, over 4 seasons, I think.
yeah. I guess we should sum up like that. We're going to be covering the whole show, all 110 episodes, and we'll sort of be doing it a couple episodes at a time.
Yeah, I think
each
that's
episode.
The plan. Yeah. So maybe when we have sort of longer arcs, we can watch the whole arc in one go and cover the whole thing in one go. But yeah. So should we just start by discussing how familiar you are with the show? Well,
I'm not at all familiar with it, besides you two telling me how much you enjoyed it, and that being the impetus for us doing the show. I don't know anything about it, besides the 2 now that I've watched.
Okay. And Tom and I have seen the show. We watched it together, I guess, a couple of years ago, or a year ago.
I think it was
during the
only
pandemic.
a year ago.
Yeah. So yeah. Shall we go blow by blow through the plot of the first 2 then?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay, I'm just going to read it from Legend of the Galactic Heroes fan wiki.
Good, yeah.
Yeah. 1st of January, 796 UC, an Imperial fleet consisting of more than 20,000 warships under the command of Reinhard von Lohengramm engages the combined Free Planets Alliance 2nd, 4th, and 6th fleets in the Astarte star zone. Against the advice of his subordinate officers, Reinhard decides on a blitzkrieg strategy, moving to quickly assault the Alliance fleets individually before they have time to complete their encirclement maneuvers. I feel like it kind of jumps ahead a little bit in that synopsis. When we kind of open the show, I think we open with Reinhard in the Imperial camp, right?
He's on the ship. I mean, aren't they in the middle of the battle, or they're about to begin the battle? It's sort of, the show sort of throws you into it, really.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, actually, I think I made a note about this. There is like a really short introduction to like the setting of the show, which lasts like only a few minutes, like a couple of minutes. And like, I'm pretty sure it starts with a reference to the poem Ozymandias. It kind of rolls across like a desert, and there's ruins in the desert. And I feel like I kind of missed that the first time I watched it. I thought maybe that was like a diegetic, that was a scene that was going to appear in the show. But now rewatching it, I'm pretty sure that is a reference to Ozymandias. And then... sorry, go.
So I noticed this as well. My question was, I didn't know if that was... I guess you're revealing now, but I didn't know if that was like within the context of the show, like the ruins of a previous empire in the show or something like that. I didn't recognize the symbols on the ruins. They're sort of like, there's like statues or something, or like the ruins of an old civilization in the desert.
I think maybe it's both. It's definitely not like a location to my memory in the show. I guess it's ambiguous whether or not we're seeing the ruins of one of these civilizations involved in the war, like thousands of years in the future, or whether we're seeing a past civilization, or whether it is just not in the universe at all and we're just seeing a reference to the poem. but yeah, it's definitely very. It kind of caught me off guard. I didn't remember it was in the beginning of the show, and yeah, it's yeah.
So this leads me to my next question, which I had watching these two, which is obviously they give you like a fake star date for when this is happening. They give you two fake star dates, in fact. So I don't know if this is like a purely fictionalized history of humans, or if this is like far in the future of our current world.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to spoil too much. There is a continuity from our time to the time in Legend of the Galactic Heroes, but it is a very, very long period of time.
Right, is it a bit like Dune in that way? Isn't Dune meant to be?
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of this far future setting where Earth has kind of become irrelevant or forgotten or whatever. So yeah, the center of civilization is no longer Earth. So
got it. So it's that it's there, but it's irrelevant.
Yeah. Again, let's not spoil too much, but yeah, it's it's not a key part of the story, especially at the beginning.
Gotcha. All right. There's some things that are really some of this is because it's like a 1988 animation, but like I don't know if this was bothering you, but when characters speak, they start speaking before the dub kicks in.
Yeah, it does happen. I think this first series, I think it does get less rough, like in the second series onwards. I was also quite surprised. The first series has some animation errors. Things are a little bit more janky. I think I haven't read like too much into the history of the development of Galactic Heroes. Maybe it would be a fun thing to do at some point for the podcast. But my understanding is that the show is really like a labor of love and was way too ambitious for the size of studio that was taking it on. So yeah, there are some teething pains in the first series, I think. Yeah,
it does seem ambitious. I saw in the credits it was a name Studio Top Gun.
Is that who made it?
They were in the credits.
Yeah. I don't know if they've made any hits recently.
Okay, so the show opens with that battle, and we get a look into inside the Imperial like war room, I guess, with the main character whose name is Lohengramm.
Yeah, you're definitely going to remember that after. Yeah,
I feel like they say it a lot.
Yeah,
I think what was it? Quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we also get a look at the like, I forget the name of it, Fezan, the like Switzerland.
Yeah.
That's like
the neutral sort of feudal, run by a feudal lord
who looks a lot like Lex Luthor from the Superman comics.
Does, yeah.
Like, he does. He does.
I get the sense he's like the whole sense I get of Fezan is that it's Monaco. It looks like Monaco to me, down to all the 80s stuff as well. Monaco still feels like the 80s there to me. And he's Lex Luthor's like a classically greedy 80s businessman in the old films, which is how that dude is presented to me in the suit with the mock turtleneck he's got going on and stuff. But it's unclear to me why. Well, I guess we'll find out, but why and how they're separate from this conflict.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so maybe it's a good time to kind of bring it up a little bit. But the guy who wrote the original stories is a historian by training. So a lot of the like environments or places do have like direct historical parallels. So Fezan is very clearly inspired by some of these smaller European countries like Monaco or Liechtenstein or Switzerland, I guess. But yeah, we will kind of find out more as we go through the series about why Fezan has managed to remain, or how it's managed to remain neutral. But yeah, I mean, I think that it doesn't present its leader as particularly morally complex in this first episode. It's very obviously like interested in profit and making money. So
yeah, he's the most cartoonish part of the show.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of it aspires to more serious sci-fi. Feels like down to the very like when I saw the costumes of the Empire, they felt very David Lynch Dune to me.
Yeah, that's true.
Very shiny leather and like it's cool. It's good. The visual design of the show is good. My first note that I wrote is sick ship designs.
I mean, we can gush about it in the future because we'll see a lot of the ships as well. I think that some of the ships in the show are like, some of the best kind of just visually striking designs for ships in any science fiction show, because they look like so functional, a lot of them, especially the Free Planet ships. They just look like there's no kind of beauty to them or like design to them. They've just been slapped together for the purpose of war. I just like the way everything looks in the show at that scale.
They look like freighters. They look like they carry a lot of, I guess they do carry a lot of people, but yeah.
And the fighters as well, like I love the way that they've got the hinges like on the thrusters, that as they're moving around they can kind of very quickly redirect themselves through space, because all of their thrusters are on hinges. It's very cool.
Oh yeah, when I first saw those, I thought they looked like because you see them quite small. I thought they were like Gundams. I thought they would be mechs. But they're very cool.
You mentioned the costumes. I think it's kind of that like 80s science fiction thing of we want them to look a bit like the Nazis, but not too much like them. So you have a lot of like leather and kind of black going on. But I think the costumes look really pretty striking, even in this first episode.
I think they're very useful for distinguishing the two civilizations as well. Like you're introduced to so many characters in these first 2 episodes, and watching it again for the second time through, I was sort of stunned by how many of these characters are. Like when I watched it the first time, I was overwhelmed by all these characters. Like, who are they? How on earth am I going to remember them all? And watching it again, I was like, oh yeah, this character and this character, and this character's in the first episode, and this one's in the first episode. It really does drop a lot of people in there. Having those costumes is quite helpful for at least distinguishing who's supposed to be on what side early on.
Yeah,
I think it helps inform you about the nature of the is it the Alliance and the Empire? In that the Empire is so like aesthetically focused. They're like, they want to look cool. Like costumes to ships to the way they name things. Like I don't know if we can if I can mention the Fortress. Which is like a black orb covered in liquid metal that has a weapon called Odin's hammer,
or Thor's hammer.
Thor's hammer. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, they mention a planet Odin, right? As well.
Yeah, Odin is the capital, I think, of the Empire. Yeah.
Yes,
that's fucking cool. Yeah. Like that's very cool, and that's clearly deliberate. Whereas the Planetary Alliance, they are not as cool. Like,
it's a lot more pragmatic and a lot more. Kind of modern, I guess, how we'd imagine it compared to the Empire, who but it almost like just lifted out of Weimar Germany, right? Just projected into space, and that just becomes more and more apparent the more of the show that you watch.
Yeah,
it's so in this battle, it's Lohengramm's ship, or his formation of ships going up against 3 different squadrons of ships from the Planetary Alliance.
Yep.
And he's surrounded and like undermanned compared to the FPA, and they're like, we've got this handled. This is going to be a classic FPA victory for us.
I think it's kind of it's amazing how much of the show is contained in these first 2 episodes. I think it's kind of what Tom was saying as well. Not just the characters, but the same conflicts and struggles for each side will just keep appearing over and over again, of the Free Planets Alliance being in like a tactically superior position and just getting completely screwed over by incompetence and corruption and people who should not be in positions that they're in. And then also seeing these characters in the Imperial camp questioning Lohengramm's authority and going against his, and desiring to like there's the character kind of jumping ahead a bit, but there's a character who turns around, ignoring his orders, and his ship gets blown up. And the reason why he turns around is because he wants like glory in battle. And you have this struggle in the Imperial camp like the whole way through the series of how do you stop your characters who are desperate to die in battle from doing that and then losing an important part of your army.
Which is what both sides deal with, right? Yeah. What is Lohengramm's opposite? What is his name?
Yang Wen-li.
Yang Wen-li. His commander is equally foolish in when I don't know if foolish is the right word, but he is like, I'll give up winning this fight to save my friend who I won't save. It's interesting that they're clearly meant to be mirrored characters. The two, they're painted as like military geniuses. So much so that they know each other. Seemingly, they're like famous. I don't know. That was one thing I didn't understand. I understood why Lohengramm was famous. He's like the prince or the count. He's like part of the royal family or something. I understood that much, but his mirrored figure in the Planetary Alliance, I don't understand why people know who he is.
Yeah, it's a lot more understated, and they do briefly mention it. I think Lohengramm himself mentions him as the strategist or the hero of some previous battle in El Facil. But it does take a little more time for you to really understand why he's famous or why he's known or why he wasn't already in command of that ship, for example, and was just this Commodore in the background. But yeah, I think in a few, I don't know how many episodes it takes, but it does clear it up a bit. But yeah,
we'll get there. Yeah. We'll get there. It did. One of the other things I noticed during the entire battle sequence across the two episodes is the casualness with which everyone discusses the battle and the war. Not even just from the top military figures who are eating dinner in their like very fancy dining rooms. I think that were aboard the ship. But even down to like the soldiers and the pilots who like lost limbs and stuff, they're like, damn, we got to keep a good work-life balance when we're, like, you got to get your rest when you're in war, which I guess is true. But also, it seemed like even the presentation of the battles in the show, when they're not using big like bombastic music, they're using like classical music during the battles that don't match how it would feel. I guess it felt less like war and more like war games. Like that these guys were playing Battleship.
Yeah, I think that's quite intentional on the part of the show. So the show does both, and I think you see it in the second episode when we'll kind of get to this plot point, I guess. But when Lap dies, you have like this sort of classical music, these broad ship movements, and then when the missile strike or when the laser strikes the bridge, and the bridge explodes, there's suddenly like blood everywhere. There's bodies going all over the place. Fires break out.
That's quite shocking.
And Lap is pinned to the wall by a piece of debris. This happens, I think, throughout the show, where you have this very like drawn out view or like drawn back view of warfare, which suddenly gets like brought into focus whenever you feel that you're forgetting that people are dying on each of these ships. The show will remind you. It's a very like strange artistic style or artistic choice, I guess. But I actually really like it. It's but it does have this depersonalized feeling a lot of the time.
I understood that it was doing that for me in the audience, but it seems like it does it to the characters as well.
Yeah, sure. They're all very jaded. Yeah, or it's all been normalized.
Yeah, the music as well is I'm sort of used to it now. So, but it's quite interesting to talk about that throughout all 4 seasons. This sort of music is used throughout classical pieces, many of which are very recognizable. Which I think part of the reason they chose all this was because it was free to use, I guess.
Is that not score for the show?
No, yeah, it's all operas and classical pieces.
Yeah. So I guess it fits in quite nicely with the kind of aesthetic of the Empire as well. But it definitely gives the show a certain character as well. I think, like this music choice throughout that makes it stand out in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I don't think it's something we necessarily need to discuss prematurely, but one of the complaints that people have about the new series, like the modern remake, is that although so I think they really switch up this like drawn out view. I haven't seen it yet, but I do intend to watch it at some point. But my understanding is that it's a lot more personal. It's a lot more, camera comes in closer on a sort of storytelling level. But they still use this classical music. And a lot of people online complain about this, that, the vibe of the music choices no longer fits the tone of the show, which I think is, it's interesting when you think about the original series and how well these two choices go hand in hand. This sort of war games feeling and these classical pieces kind of swelling over the top. Yeah. So
I think the music contributes to this old idea of the future. Is that's what the show feels like to me. It reminds it reminds me a lot of we're talking about the dining rooms that are like old fashioned, like white cloth, wood paneled, but they're in the ship, which is just strange. That's deliberate because you want to feel that sense of home life while on the ship or something. I assume that's why you do that. I did a tour of the Lloyd's of London building in London, I guess, and it's like from the 80s, so the same sort of time period, or maybe even earlier, and it was like a futurist sort of building. It looks a bit sci-fi. If you haven't seen it, you should Google it and look at pictures of it. But if you go to I forget, the 17th floor or something of that building, or maybe it's the 11th, they have a dining room in there that was taken brick by brick from a manor in Wiltshire from the 1700s. That is still exactly how it was then, but you walk into it from this 80s sci-fi building.
Right, yeah.
So it feels exactly the same way. That's what I thought of when I saw those dining rooms in the show.
That's a really good connection. I think I definitely, you pick up on this throughout the show, that like for example, even in the Free Planets Alliance, they have inside the ship basically like a high street. There was a very brief shot of it, but it's like a shopping arcade with like
I was on the ship.
It's on the ship. Yeah, so it's like a city street, with neon signs and cafes and all this kind of stuff that they've constructed inside the ship, I guess, to make people feel at home. And I think this is I really love this because it feels to me far more human than kind of more modern stories would allow for. When you why wouldn't you bring things that you were familiar with into space with you? Why would everything look like 2001 or all these sorts of things? Yeah, I think it's a good connection.
Well, one reason is that, well, I guess if it would be impractical. I guess they don't care about that. Like, I'm looking at a shot of the Imperial war room where they're looking at the giant screen with the the battleship pieces, and the room is covered in gold and marble, and there's like Ionian columns or like Corinthian. Some architect is going to like send an email telling me I'm wrong about what kind of column it is. But I don't know. I wouldn't know. I have no knowledge of architecture. So yeah, that's just there's no reason to do that except to say you like that and you want that sense of home on the ship.
I guess so. I mean, I think in the case of the Empire, it kind of like Umberto Eco talking about fascism being an aesthetic ideology first. This idea that like you need to impose a certain aesthetic onto everything you do, otherwise fascism begins to lose its legitimacy. To me, like the Empire's use of all of these architectural flourishes or wood paneling things or whatever, it's like forcing this ideology into space, bringing this nobility out with you onto these these warships. In the case of the Free Planets Alliance, I guess most of the war rooms and stuff are pretty stark, right? Like Yang Wen-li's war room is just steel and like computers, and it looks a lot more science fiction, a lot more what we'd expect to see. So I think it's very intentional. I mean, I should look up the background of the author of Legend of the Galactic Heroes and what exactly he studied. I think it's Chinese history. I think he's a classical Chinese historian. But yeah, he's deeply interested in totalitarianism and fascism. So not that he's a fan of it. He's interested in the history of it. Yeah, just to clear that up.
I gotcha. Okay. One other thought I had when they're showing the the battle formations on the screen, I think one of the reasons I picked up on the battleship nature of it is because it shows everything on a 2D plane, and they circle and like strafe and like flank on 2D planes, but they're in space.
Yeah.
They can operate in 3 dimensions, right? Surely that would give you some tactical. You could literally play 3D chess. Is that just a simplified look to explain things for the show, or do they ever get into the 3D nature of space warfare?
To my memory, people do in future episodes pull off like 3D maneuvers. You have like maneuvers where people come from underneath or from on top. But on the whole, I think battles are fought like basically on a plane, like you say. And I think maybe that's for the sake of the audience, or maybe there is something to that. That there are rules of engagement that neither side is willing to break.
I think on the whole, the representation of the battles in that, with the screen with the battleships kind of style to it is used throughout. It doesn't really get updated or anything like that. I don't really remember much about the 3D nature of these battles. But I think, and I'm not sure how clear it is in the first 2 episodes, because it really throws you into the middle of into the middle of this battle for the first 2 episodes. And so much of the show is not space battles in space, and takes place on the ground in planets or in palaces or in like political centers. That I think that like the representation of how these battles are taking place is not super important to the themes of the show in a way. Like the strategy is important, and the relationship between the characters through strategy is important, like the second guessing of one another, or this aspect. But yeah, the actual mechanics of the battles I always felt was not too important, and maybe this is why they go for that simple style. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. I mean, I think, for example, like the second episode, we're kind of jumping ahead again, but the second episode ending with an Ouroboros with the 2 characters basically eating each other's tails. The battles in the show are like more symbolic, and they're more like dialogues between characters and between ideologies than they are interesting strategic space engagements. And I think, for example, in the case of this episode, the storyteller needs to win the genius of Yang Wen-li from the audience, or needs to win the genius of Lohengramm from the audience. And that's basically the only reason why this battle is taking place, kind of on that scale. And we get to see all the other interactions going on at the same time. But yeah, it is not a show that's very interested with the intricacies of its space combat system. It's really not that show.
It's interesting that it would spend the first 2 episodes primarily focused on that.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it makes more sense when you describe it as dialogue. It's a show really about these 2 guys who can't communicate, and they can only communicate by throwing ships at each other. Husna was my sister was sat next to me while we were watching the first episode, and she was like, "Oh, this is really just gay Battlestar Galactica, isn't it?"
Okay.
It's really about a lot of guys and their ability or their inability to communicate their feelings towards one another.
So we have a friend who's also a fan of the show, and he just calls it Gays in Space, because it is like an extreme, and I was wondering how many episodes it would be before it came up. It is an extremely homoerotic show, and homoromantic, and it's very there and it doesn't even feel like subtext a lot of the time. Like, and also, I mean, obviously now I'm in Japan and Tom's in Japan. There's these characters are so popular with women's doujinshis. They're like, there are like
what is a doujinshi?
Like a sort of short manga story, like fan servicey manga story. So sometimes they're like explicitly pornographic, but a lot of the time they're not. And
these are fan made.
Yeah, or made by like an artist who's been licensed to do so.
Okay.
And these are incredibly popular. These like romance doujinshis between the characters of Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Which, yeah, this kind of homoerotic subtext is very, it's very well established, and I think basically everyone sees it. So I was wondering when it would come up. First episode. There we go.
Well, it's clear from the get-go in that Lohengramm only seems to care about one single Planetary Alliance soldier, who he doesn't refer to by name, but he just refers to as that man.
I mean, speaking of homoerotic undertones, I wrote on my notes, my boys are already boozing it up, because the two characters, Reinhard and Mittermeier, who I don't even think are named in this episode.
They get their names flashed across. Like there's so many characters get like they get like one line. I think they have like one brief conversation there where they're like, he's fine without us. He didn't need us for this battle. That's basically the only thing they say to each other. But their names flash up.
So sorry, who are you referring to? Because I don't think I know those names.
So there's these two guys who are sitting in a kind of restaurant or at a table drinking wine, and they're like sitting there like cross-legged, like, we knew that Lohengramm was going to do well. He's doing great, you know. That's Reinhard and Mittermeier, and that they will be key characters, I guess. I was just surprised to see them in the very first episode. I didn't think that they even appeared until like season 2.
Is this the guy with the heterochromia?
Oh yeah.
Yes, he is one of them. Yeah.
I know who you mean. Yeah. They briefly mention other like sets of characters. There's the two pilots, right, or the two lower soldiers. One who's got like a robotic arm or something.
Right. Yeah.
They're discussing like the work-life balance of war. Are they also important characters that will show up, or is that just meant to represent?
I actually think
everyman?
Those two soldiers who just talk about like the sleep pod, I don't think they come up. Maybe they do again, but to my memory, they're not. Well, they're definitely not important characters. But Poplin and oh god, I can't remember his name.
Is he called Konev or something?
Yeah, Konev or something.
Konev.
Yeah, they are very important later on. The two
two fighter pilots.
Yeah, fighter pilots. Yeah.
Are they the two that go into the hypno sleep?
No. Those are different characters. Yeah.
Okay. That's just they're there to demonstrate that like the soldiers are treated like cattle.
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of difficult to know when you watch this first episode. Yeah, who's going to be important and who isn't. I would say that I was surprised that most of the characters who appear on screen will be important characters going forwards. I expected there to be more like fodder in the show in the first episode. But really, I think it's just those two soldiers. Everyone else will appear again at least once.
Okay. When they they cut away from the battle a couple of times, once to show Lex Luthor on Faizan, also to show Lohengramm's sister, I think,
Anna Rose,
who's living at like a French like manor or something. I couldn't tell what kind of architecture it was. It was clearly like Western European, a mansion of some kind, and they're in the garden, completely without a care in the world. Seemingly without any knowledge that like they had to be told that the brother's in battle and stuff.
So I think, I mean, obviously you'll pick up on this as well as the show goes on, but I think it mentions that the Isilon corridor, like the Free Planets Alliance, has not been able to break through the Isilon corridor at all. So the entire war has happened beyond the borders of the Empire. So the people at the heart of the Empire, I don't think they have any kind of, no one really cares. Obviously dead soldiers come home, but yeah, I guess that's what you're seeing there, is the nobility have no immediate threat to their well-being. So it's all very, very chilled out.
So they I think we'll get to the corridor because they mentioned that in episode 2. So in episode 1, this battle plays out with Lohengramm demonstrating his own tactical genius by taking on the larger units one at a time to take them out one at a time, which gives Yang Wen-li,
Yep.
Yang Wen-li, his own opportunity to demonstrate his genius in doing game theory and like trying to salvage the situation that his commander didn't allow him to previously. And then that episode ends with them finally coming into conflict.
Yep.
For the first and last time.
Yeah. It's crazy that they never fight again.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
What a fake
think
out.
the show would be setting that up or something, but
so when they one thing I wanted to mention about the aesthetics is I really like how they depict all of the ships as like organized grids of lights in space.
Yeah.
It looks extremely cool.
Yeah. I actually made a note about this as well, that one of the things I really love about the show and how well researched the original stories were is like when people write space opera, especially, and when they write these stories with like these massive fleets, the human brain is just not very good at imagining like that many moving parts in a battle or that many people. And at the end, it says that like 15 million or 1.5 million people died on the side of the Free Planets Alliance. And you're like,
a massive success for the FDA.
And you're like, when you're talking about space opera, when you're talking about empires of trillions of people, these are the sorts of numbers you'd expect to lose in a battle. And yeah, like the ships being depicted as just these walls of lights with sort of no, it's not, it kind of, when you zoom out that far, all of the heroism sort of disappears. I really like this. Yeah, it's very well researched, or very well sort of imagined, I think.
Well, speaking about the number of deaths that happens at the end of the battle, when they finally decide to both retreat because it's a untenable situation from the Ouroboros that they create. So 150,000 losses on the Imperial side and 1.5 million on the Planetary Alliance side.
Yeah, something like that.
I think that was right. Now, when they both report back to the Imperial planets and to the Planetary Alliance, they both describe it as a massive success for them, a huge win. Yeah. Now, I couldn't tell because of the scale of the conflict and the amount of population that they have, if they actually consider it a success, or if it is purely propaganda to say, no, don't worry, everything's fine. Yeah. We won.
I think it's propaganda on both sides. I don't know how Tom feels about this, but definitely that was my interpretation at the end. I made a note, like, both sides claiming victory.
Yeah. I think even in the moment you hear Yang Wen-li and Lohengramm both basically call it a stalemate, and then and then that's it. Yeah, but the news filters back differently. But again, this will just happen over and over again, like people trying to mask or massage the truth to gain favor or power.
Is the Planetary Alliance is much larger than the Empire, right? In terms of,
I think,
like purely size.
I think it's actually the other way around at the beginning of the show. That the Empire is much larger in terms of population.
Wow. Okay, I understood it to be like, maybe this is wrong. You're telling me it's wrong, but I understood like the FPA to have a much larger population, way more soldiers, way more things they can throw at the Empire, but the Empire has a clear technological advantage.
I think I don't actually think that that's the case. I could be wrong, and maybe we can issue a correction next episode if I'm wrong. But I think that at the beginning of the show, the Empire has got a numerical advantage, but not like a massive one. but that the Empire has like internal kind of political struggles, which will become clear as time goes on, which make it slightly less effective. Obviously, the FPA has its own political struggles, which I think will literally come up next episode. But the Empire has been a little stunted and hasn't been able to bring like its full power to bear for a while.
I think it could also be that the military numbers are maybe even, or the alliance might have slightly more at this moment in time. But in terms of the general population, I think the Empire probably is bigger. I don't know how long we wait before we hear about some of the history of where these two groups of people diverge in the history as well, which might explain that sort of thing as well.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of history, when I watch a science fiction thing that involves a war between an empire and an alliance, or it can be fantasy too, I feel like they're often referring to real world things, like famously Game of Thrones and the War of the Roses. Star Wars was the US versus Vietnam, like when George Lucas originally wrote it. Retired filmmaker George Lucas, and so I think the symbols and like naming conventions being used for the Empire and the Planetary Alliance, the central figure of the Planetary Alliance has a Chinese name, right? And he has a German name on the Imperial side. Is it meant to reflect like a speculative conflict between like a Central European empire and a Pan-Asian sort of conflict? Is that?
I don't.
That's sort of what it felt like.
Yeah, I don't think so. I understand that it might seem that way from the get-go, or from the first couple of episodes. But I think as you get to know the Free Planets Alliance, the fact that Yang Wen-li has a Chinese name is not a coincidence. Maybe I could talk about it in a moment. But the Free Planets Alliance is like extremely multicultural. There's people with various different names and ethnicities, whereas the Empire, although there's an implication that it's multicultural, the nobility is not. They're all German names and German heritage, I guess. There's one that's definitely true as far as I can tell from doing research, which is that the Free Planets Alliance is partly based on Taiwan. So there is a large amount of influence from there, and it's why Yang Wen-li has a Chinese name. But I think there are the other two major influences on the story are the Napoleonic Wars, which is very clear as we go through Lohengramm's story, and also World War II, which is fairly obvious from the sort of Free Planets Alliance being a stand-in for the Allies and the Empire being a stand-in for Nazi Germany. But yeah, I think there's a lot of other influence coming in, and there probably is stuff from like the Warring States period in China and all these other things, because he is that's his area. The writer is Chinese history, right. So there's going to be stuff that as Westerners we're less familiar with. So yeah, I don't think it's explicitly supposed to be this speculative kind of future conflict.
Gotcha. At the end of episode 1, to just roll back slightly, who was the man who was violently killed? It was a friend of Yang Wen-li's, right? Lap, who they sort of thought was similarly like quite competent and intelligent, and just immediately killed off, and lets his like soldiers have photographs of their girlfriends. He has a hologram of her head,
which spins comedically past the camera to the flames. Yeah.
But it's funny to me that it's just her head, like a mugshot, like not a photo of the two of them together, or like a memory.
It's also like, I thought at the time, it's not a very candid photograph. It's like very staged. She's like looking directly at the camera and smiling. It's very awkward.
It's what you'd have today if you did a 3D scan of your head.
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing.
Maybe that's how they got it. You have to go to like a booth and they scan your head. Yeah.
Both episodes begin and end with a narrator, opening and closing the episode. The way the narrator talks, he doesn't seem. He seems omniscient only in the sense that he sounds like he's talking from the future, describing a history of what happens. Because I think at one point at the end of episode 2, he mentions, you know, in the future they'll describe this event as XYZ. Is that just stylistic, or am I meant to infer that this is not a omniscient, fully to be trusted narrator?
Maybe Tom could also offer a. I don't know if you have a.
I think this is. I don't think the narrator at any point strikes me as untrustworthy. I think it is like it's meant to sound like a history. So it's like the events that we're seeing throughout the show have already happened, and we're reading through that history.
I guess my question is, if this is a conflict between two powers and that's a history being told, is it a history written from one of the sides because they won and they get to determine it? Or is it objectively, he's describing it as it is?
It's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about it.
I hadn't thought about it,
Well, that's what you get when you bring in a brand new viewer to the show. There's a new viewpoint on things.
It's way too early to talk about how the show ends. So maybe we can revisit this conversation at the end of our journey and we can decide.
Sure. What I think we should do at the end of this episode is I'll give my predictions for how I think this will end.
Okay.
108 episodes from now.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure I'll get right.
Yeah. I mean,
we'll try not to give anything away in our facial expressions or in our responses to you. We'll just.
You can turn your cameras off when I'm doing it. It's fine. It's
fine. But yeah, the narrator, I think he does introduce every episode and probably closes every episode, or nearly every episode.
Do you think, in a way, that's a reference to like Star Trek when the 60s series would open with Kirk like saying Stardate, Captain's Log, and then describing the events leading up to. It reminded me of that. I mean, I guess it's difficult not to.
It's totally possible. I think that was an inspiration. I mean, I think Star Trek is definitely an inspiration. Yeah, you could be right. I kind of read it as like, because it's a historian who wrote the stories, he is telling a story that he would be interested in reading. And that means seeing it, the whole, like the narration is happening from the point of view of history. So you have a historian like discussing these events and whatever. So yeah, it's always at a scale that the writer finds personally interesting. But yeah, not a very interesting.
Yeah, I guess the natural question for me then is, I understood it to be a history, but there are, if you read a history of India from a British guy in 1888 or whatever versus a British Indian scholar today, they'd have different views of what happens. So I was just wondering if it ever, had that subjectivity to it. Be interesting.
It's a good question. I think I would have to rewatch the show with that lens in mind. Yeah, because I hadn't.
Or like, does it imply a planetary alliance bias, or the opposite, maybe, or it's told from a view of someone from Faizan or something?
I mean, I think the show definitely has like its angle is like great man history. I don't think that this is like, at no point does the show like drift into social history at all. And maybe there's like one of.
When you say great man history, what do you mean?
Like the important events take place in the minds and between the important players of the story. So like Yang Wen-li and Ryan and Lohengramm fighting on the battlefield is far more important than the lives of the soldiers on those ships or these sorts of things. It definitely has that lens and that bias. There's only a handful of episodes I can think of which kind of break that and take you kind of lower down to that level. It definitely, I don't think it's very interested in social history at all. So I think definitely in that sense there's a bias. In terms of, is there a bias towards one side or the other? I personally don't think so. I think it sees the important, or like the great men on both sides of the story as equally brilliant and equally interesting. Definitely.
I think you could maybe read into the political leanings of the writer a little bit throughout the show, what he might value, I guess, and therefore maybe might favor one civilization's viewpoint over another or something like that. But I don't think it comes through the narration to mask what's actually happening in the show. So I think the narrator is honest in describing the events that take place throughout the show. But maybe some of the things that happen in the show, you might say, oh, this seems maybe like the writer of the show is leaning towards this viewpoint a little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
But it definitely keeps the question the whole way through, like asks questions. And I think even the characters ask the questions themselves of what type of civilization is better to live in. Something like the Free Planets Alliance or something like the Empire or something different.
Yeah. I think we mentioned it in texts before, but I remember someone framing the question that the show is asking, like the central question that the show is asking is it better to live in a fair, just, and functioning autocracy, or in a corrupt democracy? That making that call, the writer doesn't seem to have like a great answer, and the whole process of the show is kind of an attempt, I think, to figure out the answer to that question.
After finishing the show, do you feel like you both have an answer to that question, even if the show doesn't present one itself? Or maybe you always had an answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always had an answer that I'd rather live in a corrupt democracy. But
yeah,
I think especially given the
show didn't make you think, well, I don't know, this other side looks pretty good.
I think the show, oh man, now we're really getting off the rails, but the show never gets around the main problem of if you have an extremely just and fair and benign autocracy, the problem is that your ruler is always going to die, and at some point, and I think the show acknowledges that problem all the way throughout. The mortality of the figurehead at the top of your kingdom is an issue. Whereas with democracy, even if it is failing in the moment, because it's defined as something which can change and reshape itself, it is far less damaged by a bad ruler.
But certainly doesn't gloss over what things are like when you do have a bad ruler or bad rulers.
It certainly doesn't. Yeah.
And how unchangeable that can feel for people as well.
I don't know. This just reminded me of this, but have you ever seen I think it's from like 2005 or 6. It's a Hong Kong film, I think, by Johnny To called Election. Have you guys seen this?
I've not seen it, no.
It's a film about the triads. So like, I guess the equivalent of the mafia in that part of the world. And the fact that when a head of a family like steps down or dies, the son doesn't immediately take on the role of the head of the family. They have an election amongst the heads of the family as to who the head of the triad should be, which I just think it's interesting to partner democracy with like a corrupt enterprise in that way. Anyway, it just reminded me of that.
I mean, the Mongols, like the Khans of Mongolia, were elected leaders, right? So it's kind of similar there, where you have this kind of person leading the biggest army and the largest empire in the world was elected by the noble families of the horde.
Is like Genghis Khan was elected?
I don't think he was.
He founded it.
He founded it. Well, maybe he was, but then after him, there had to be an election. It was like when you read European history and when the Mongols arrive in Eastern Europe, a lot of the time they just seem to miraculously leave. And people are like thanking God and saying that like Jesus has intervened or whatever. But as it turns out, they all have to go back to Mongolia to hold the election because the Khan is dead. It's it does happen. And also, the HRE, the Holy Roman Empire, which is basically like Germany before Germany. I'm oversimplifying, but that was an elective empire as well. So it has happened throughout history. But it's definitely not the norm.
After is it Lappy's death? Lap's death. They sort of cut to a piano tune, which sounded so much to me like the in memoriam music they do at award shows for the like celebrities that have died in the past year. And then it cuts to his fiancée playing piano at home in like a strange, like metallic neighborhood with it's like a forced. I don't know how to explain. Not a naturally made community. It felt like a military encampment almost, but the inside of her home felt like a house from the 80s.
Yeah.
And then the biggest shock I had in this episode when they revealed her name to be Jessica Edwards, which the names in this show really something else.
The names are really all over the place. I don't know what Lap is supposed to be, like as in what that name is supposed to be short for, or like.
I think it's his surname, right? But I don't know what.
Lap.
I'm not really sure what he's supposed to be.
Maybe it is a real surname from somewhere, but I thought it was. Yeah,
he was called. I think he had a French name. Wasn't he called like Jean Robert?
Jean Robert Lap.
Lap. Yes, I guess he's French. Yeah.
Maybe.
Wow.
Yeah, the names are great. And I hope you are good at remembering like 100 German surnames because there's going to be a lot of them.
Well, I'm gonna have to get good at it.
Yeah.
After a while, you pick them up. I think the major characters, they occur so frequently after a while that you do know who they are, especially when an episode decides to focus on them. You're like, this guy who's been in the background a lot, and every time he appears, I forget who he is moments later. Now it's his episode, and now I remember him forever. So
yeah.
But yeah, it is.
What episode do you think I will remember the names by? Do you think?
Of everyone. I'm not sure I remembered the names of everyone by the end. There's the guy with the white hair in the Imperial camp.
Yeah, who is that guy again? I can't remember his name. I always forget his name. I have a feeling he's in a lot of episodes as well.
He is, yeah. He's an important character. Yeah.
In this episode, they also talk about the corridor that they do battle in. Could you explain the corridor a little bit to me? Because it feels like the idea that they can only have battle in this small portion of space is strange to me. It doesn't. There are no walls. There are no roads in space. So I don't understand how it can only be in this small stretch of space that they can battle.
They only go into this a couple of times in the show, which is weird. But I'm pretty sure that they have like a jump technology, like a jump drive system. And the reason why they can only fight in that corridor is, I guess, you need to be near a star in order to grab enough energy to do the jump. And it just so happens that this part of space is separated by very few stars, which does actually happen in the real galaxy. Between spiral arms of the galaxy, there'll be very thin kind of, or very few stars. So you could end up with this kind of void between regions. So I think that is the point, is like, it's not that there's like a very specific part of space. It's just that in order to jump from this part of space to this part of space, there's only two possible routes you can use using the stars available to you. And so battles are always going to take place in those regions of space.
This makes sense to me. I think my confusion was, I think a lot of my confusion has been down to the diagram of the routes and the battles and stuff. Because when they first showed the battleships, and they seem fairly close to each other, and then when Yang Wen-li is like, space is big. It's going to take us like 6 hours to get to the other group. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that is true. But when you look at it on just the pieces on the map, they look like they're right next to each
Yeah,
other.
yeah,
Like it'll take 5
yeah.
minutes. So yeah, I guess that makes sense.
They do mention just really in passing that one battle did happen like away from the corridor. Like I can't remember where it is when they're talking about Isilon Fortress. They say that like one happened like far away from one of the stars.
They mentioned all the names of the battles, right? Battle of Tiamat 1, Tiamat 2.
Yeah.
And then like the battles in the skies over like this star. And I can't remember which one it is, but and I guess the implication there is that they tried to sneak around by taking the long way around a star and trying to go unnoticed. But yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't think they go into detail on it in the show.
Is the show interested in like the sort of mechanics of space travel in a way, like or I think about like the movie The Martian, and they try to like slingshot around planets and use gravity to help them. Is the show interested in that at all, or it's not?
Not really.
Really, I would say the show doesn't really ever address many technological questions, but when it does, it uses them for kind of like narrative or historic purpose, I would say. We will see, I don't know when they're going to appear. I don't think it takes too long for this group to appear in the show, but there's definitely like, technology that gets thrown into the setting that is used to just basically give this group of characters a specific aesthetic that the writer of the show wanted them to have. Why would they be wearing this kind of armor, or why would they be using these kind of weapons or something like this? It's basically like technology that justifies having those things in the show. Changing the battlefield, I guess, in terms of strategy. Sometimes technology gets introduced to mix those kind of things up. But on the whole, it doesn't really explore these questions.
Yeah. I think
it doesn't seem like a visual designer's. It doesn't seem visual design first in how they depict technology.
No.
I was thinking about when Yan Wen-li is heading to the graveyard at the end of episode 2. He drives in a sick car, a very cool looking car. It looks like the car we'd have today if the Model T was a DeLorean, and like they've had that amount of advancement since then. It's very cool looking. I think there was even like a rickshaw or something like that there as well, sort of like a bubble car or something. But then they'll also have like a 1980s video telephone that looked like it was from Back to the Future. Next to a piano. I guess it makes sense that technology would be a mishmash and it would be incongruous. Not everything would fall into a unified aesthetic design unless you lived in fascist land, I guess. I think the visual design is made more interesting for being that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was, it's kind of like when you go into Star Trek, whatever, you're going in for the big science fiction ideas, and maybe you'll get like a nice sprinkling of like political intrigue or interpersonal kind of conflict. But I think when you go into Legend of the Galactic Heroes, you're going in for the political drama, and it just so happens to have space battles and spaceships in it for you to, so you don't get bored.
Do you think that's the reason why the writers decided to put it in space? Like it's a question of the producer said, "What if we put this in space?" But really, he wanted to do a historical.
I just think it was about the scale, right? Like I think he wanted to tell like a massive historical narrative, and space. I mean, he wanted to set it in the future, so it wouldn't be a historical drama, I guess. And space just seems like the natural place to set it. But
it's just interesting to me that you said he put the story in space, but actually he's not that interested in space or or the
I guess he's
any of the trappings that come with that.
So like this is a really different piece of art, but like for example, the visual novel Heaven Will Be Mine is set in space, but there the use of space is like about it becomes this like emotional and spiritual place, which represents like opportunity for the characters, or the opportunity for change for the characters. I think so much science fiction takes this like materialist lens, and it becomes so fascinated with the technologies and the kind of what kind of structures we need to actually make it into space, and leaves behind all of these questions of what will it emotionally or spiritually mean to live in space, or what, in the case of Heaven Will Be Mine, what will it mean for gender dynamics or for gender itself, or in the case of Legend of the Galactic Heroes, what will it mean for politics? So I don't think it's like a mistake that it's in space or just a coincidence, but I also don't think that the writer is yet at all interested in the technology or materialist side. This is purely a story about people and their ideals being projected onto space, if that makes sense.
So after Jessica Edwards finds out about her fiance dying, she meets Yang Wen-li at the graveyard. A really beautiful scene, like the way it's like depicted at like twilight and stuff. We get another look at Faison and the evil businessman in Monaco. But we also cut away to the sister of Lohengramm. What was her name again? Anna
Rose, I think.
Anna Rose. Is the writer a big fan of like Emma and like like her friend comes to her and is like, if they get to come, she's talking about Lohengramm's like second in command or something.
And
like, and I get the sense that like she wants to marry him or something like that. It felt very Emma, Pride and Prejudice, that sort of thing.
Yeah. You'll get some Austen stuff.
Good. Right. The show has been a real surprise for me, I gotta say. It's not. You did preface it well by saying it was like political and whatnot, but even then, it has surprised me. One thing I wanted to mention earlier on, but I forgot to, is that the theme song to the show.
We should talk about it before we close off. Yeah.
It sounds like a national anthem. It sounds like something they would play at the Olympics. Yeah. I assume deliberate.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a tendency for the opening songs of the show to be deeply bad and deeply funny, and for the outro songs to be incredibly good.
To slap hard, yeah.
To absolutely slap, yeah. I think In the Skies of Love is not the worst offender.
I think they really escalate over the season, so that's something to look forward to. The singer is the same, and I'm not quite sure whether it's the way that the melody is written or not. That she seems unable to hit some of the notes that I expect to hear as part of the melody.
Wow, she's pitchy for you.
But I think every new season the theme song doesn't disappoint in that respect.
I've really grown to love them a lot. The fourth opening songs.
And some of the choice of the lyrics is astonishing, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, The Skies of Love is a great start, but I think there's a long way to go.
Yeah.
And The Skies of Love is the opening, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what that means yet. Is that something I will learn what that means?
The Skies of Love.
I mean,
I guess
you're here at the beginning of every episode in the theme song, but
okay. I guess I'll learn eventually. I'll force myself to learn.
I don't know if
I didn't hate it. It kind of reminded me of the theme to Final Fantasy, like especially like the one from 15, because it sounds like a bit national anthem-y, a bit wedding-y, like a bit, I don't know, celebratorily. How would I say that? Celebratory.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the song. I really hope that the
besides the singing, which
I really hope that the singer never listens to this podcast. It's just that there's that one note at the end of "In the Skies of Love," which, although I think she does technically hit the note, is not delivered with the amount of force that it probably should be. So it sort of feels very disappointing when the song ends. Anyway,
I think we can blame that on the audio engineer, right? That was just a bad take.
Yeah, maybe so.
And every singer has a bad take.
Yeah.
I'm sure she kills it live.
Yeah.
I've heard live versions of the song, and they're a lot better. So yeah.
So this is really popular though.
The show.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a cult classic, I guess.
Is it like how the West thinks about Twin Peaks?
In Japan, I think probably similarly. Yeah. It's kind of old. So like whenever I ask my coworkers about the show here in Japan, they're like, "Oh, my dad really likes that show." You know, like that's like kind of the level that we're talking about. Nobody talks about it like our age in Japan. So
and there is the cafe. It's still standing. You get to talk about your coasters now if you want.
Well, I think we can leave discussion of the cafe in detail for a future episode.
I see.
But there is a cafe in Tokyo themed after the show, and I have been, and I do have some coasters for some of the characters.
When you say it's themed after the show, is it like a 17th century dining room? Or
yes, the walls are like wood paneled. There's like flock wallpaper. It's all very like plastic, but yeah. And they have themed meals, and they have. I want to go into it. They have themed drinks. I can't tell you all of the themed food and drinks because technically they're spoilers. So I think maybe we can bring one up as they naturally appear.
Okay.
Throughout the show.
Can you make the drinks at home?
Some of them.
Yeah, some of them. Yeah.
Like maybe for a special episode, you make the Lohengramm or whatever.
Yeah, I'm sure I can do that. Yeah. It's a fun place to go. So if you're ever in Tokyo or so, then we should go.
I hope to be. Is it styled after the Planetary Alliance or styled after the Imperials? Because one of them has some unfortunate connotation.
It's sort of in between, I'd say.
Sort of
directly in between.
Yeah.
Really centrist cafe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But one of the coolest things, there were two cool things that happened there. One is that there was a girl who had every single coaster that they're like commemorative coasters with pictures of the characters on them. And this girl had a folder with like Pokemon card sleeves, with every single coaster and like duplicates of every single coaster. And she was just selling them in the cafe. They all had like labels on them. And she allowed us to look through the folder of coasters that she had collected over the years. And it was like multiple folders,
Yeah, she like priced them all. And the thing is, you can't get these coasters anywhere other than when you purchase food or drinks at this one specific cafe. So I don't really know who's trading these things other than people who go to the cafe.
Sounds like she's the entire secondary market.
Yeah. So while we were sitting there, people were coming over and looking through her collection and buying coasters from her. So there was a whole like black market of Legend of the Galactic Heroes coasters, which I think we've probably got the scoop on. I don't think anyone's ever reported on it before.
Yeah, I don't know.
So the one you got, if you can show it to the audience, is that so who? I guess you can't tell me who that is. Maybe
I honestly can't tell you who this is because
I don't recognize who that is.
It's the new art style.
Yeah,
I don't recognize the character. I think it might
have a name on it.
It might be Poplin, but like gross modern Poplin.
Where's the name?
It's just kanji. I can't read it.
Okay,
I'll figure it out.
So your view on the new show, the rebuild of Legend of the Galactic Heroes, is reject modernity, embrace tradition.
That is my.
If you could summarize it in 4 words.
That's my position. Yeah.
But only on this show.
Yes. Yeah. No, I'm not going to advocate for that position on all things. Just on this and Evangelion and
right.
the Netflix Cowboy Bebop show.
I think there's some shows that don't really need to be remade. I don't really know what was wrong with the original Legend of the Galactic Heroes. That I don't know why you'd want to remake it. I don't know.
Animation's a little rough. I mean, that's not actually a criticism I have of it. It's just the faces are Lohengramm's second in command, the best friend or whoever.
Yeah, okay, I see it.
There's such little animation going on in his face.
Yeah.
That I feel like he's a sociopath. And I don't know that the show's actually intending to tell me that, but the animation is telling me that because he has a soft smile on his face always, regardless of the situation.
I think he's supposed to look kindly.
No. He looks like he'd kill you and not care. But that's just budget, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's just they don't budget to animate eyebrows and stuff.
Also, it was all done with traditional cells and stuff. So
yeah, look good. All the painted backgrounds and stuff look nice. I like that. You know what? I was on the fence, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to watch all 108 more episodes.
You're on the fence. I can't believe you made us record a podcast with you.
I'm glad we managed to convince you over the course of the recording that it's worth continuing.
No, I was in it for the long haul from the beginning. Yeah, that was settled. But I think we basically covered the first 2 episodes, right? I don't think there's anything else anyone else wants to talk about.
No, it's good. I think I went through all my notes.
Me too.
Just some quotes I wrote down from the dialogue. I don't know if this is down to the translation or, it was intended. Let me just see. From episode 1. I don't know. I can't remember who says this now, but I liked. It's like holding a barrel of gunpowder to our belly and saying, "Shoot me, please." Which I think that's Yang Wen-li talking to the commander and describing their situation.
Yeah. That's
which is just a good line.
It's a good line. It's a classic saying.
Do they say it a lot in the show?
No, I wish it came up again. There was the classic line when Reinhard's fleet is being destroyed.
Yeah.
And he looks absolutely miserable. And Kirky Ice leans in and he's like, "Are you frustrated?"
With like a smile on his face. Yeah. I was really pleased to see that come up in like the episode 1 or episode 2. Yeah. That meme is everywhere. And it was nice that it came up so early.
Another one I liked was after Yang Wen-li's ship gets hit with rockets or lasers or whatever it is, and they're asking about, has someone seen this, one of their comrades? Just as after they mentioned him, the comrade shows up and says, "I'm not going to hell that easily," which sounds like it's from a Sylvester Stallone movie from the 80s. Sounds very like Jean-Claude Van Damme, that sort of.
Yeah, it's so good.
And his character is supposed to be American, that one?
Good, then that's good writing.
Dusty.
That's Dusty.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, now I'm definitely going to watch all 108 more episodes. And the final quote I wrote was towards the end when Jessica Edwards, is Jessica or Jennifer? Jessica Edwards speaks with Yang Wen-li at the graveyard, and she tells him, like, "I don't blame you, but this is kind of your fault."
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing. And then he just sort of nods and goes, "Our job was war." Yeah. Which is just a funny way to phrase that. Not strategy, our job was war. Just war. I got to do war.
Let's see you, honey. I'm off to war.
That's how it sounded. He really fucked up his job that day.
He did.
Yeah. Good show. Good 2 episodes.
I'm looking forward to the next 108 episodes.
Oh, yeah.
Now you know the show better than I do. The next arc, I guess that this felt like an ending of an arc, maybe a two-parter. Is the next one like? Are we going to watch 2 episodes, 3? What do you think?
Let me check the synopsis.
Look it up. Yeah.
I think it's probably going to be 2. I think it's going to be 2.
Yeah, often we sort of switch back for between the Empire and between the Free Planets Alliance for a couple of episodes at a time or something like that. So that might be one way to, I don't know, to decide when an arc finishes or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, we will check the synopses and work it out.
Cool. Okay. I have to give my predictions, right?
Oh, yeah.
What I think was going to happen for the next 108.
I'm desperate to hear this, yeah.
Or at least in the short term, maybe. And the long term. Yeah, I want to hear the long term ones.
Yeah.
I'm going to go for big, I think, big swings. I don't know how many planets are in the Free Planetary Alliance, but I have a feeling that the Planetary Alliance will have to deal with like separatists, or like a planet wanting to leave the Alliance, or maybe even like separating off and joining the Empire or something like that. Or maybe they get colonized by the Empire. I think there's going to be like tussles over one of the planets in the Alliance. Yang Wen-li will ascend to like a top position in the military, like an equivalent to Lohengramm's. They'll have like lunch together, like Heat, like with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, like the one time they meet in the whole show
with Andre.
Yeah, like sizzling with tension, but it'll be the only time they meet. That's probably not true, but I feel like I feel like they won't meet that often. There'll be lots of like telegrams and stuff, or like FaceTime. They do have FaceTime, don't they? Yeah.
They don't call it that though.
They do.
Yeah. I don't know. They should.
They should. Yeah.
It'd make it way easier for the audience to understand what was going on.
And Anna Rose will die, and that will cause Lohengramm to like lose it. I just sense they have a strange relationship. Those two. It feels like they're royals or whatever, and she seems strange, and that's the sense I get from those two. And we will never meet Yang Wen-li's family because he's an orphan.
Interesting theory.
The first scene of episode 3 is going to be him at family dinner with the whole clan. I think Jessica Edwards will be a main character. It seems odd to introduce her in this way and not have her come back again. Like, her role doesn't seem to be just the cost of war. I feel like the death of her fiance is an impetus for her to do something larger. Like maybe she starts like an anti-war movement or something. I'm not sure. And I think the Planetary Alliance is going to take it in the war. They're going to win 4-3 in the finals. But I think they're going to take it. You just can't. Just overwhelming numbers. So we'll play back that clip in episode like 55 or whatever when we get to the end.
I would love to hear your predictions updated. Like, we don't have to do it like every podcast, but hearing updated predictions as we go would be great.
Yeah. Maybe at the end of every season, right? Because there's like 4 seasons, right? So maybe I do it at the end of every season.
I want to roll them together as well. Like in the last episode, I think we should roll them together. With like your predictions from this episode. And then as it's sort of fading out, fade in your next one, and it just keeps escalating with some music in the background. And maybe even me saying this, I think the music is really going to make it seem very dramatic. And then we'll reveal.
The good news is I can just use the music from the show, which is public domain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's actually the whole reason we chose to do this podcast. So.
Yeah.
Do you think I can find like chiptune versions of the music from the show to put in?
I mean, most of them are very famous operas and ballets, so probably.
Definitely. Yeah. All right, cool. That's all my notes.
This was great. This is an even hour and a half as well, so good time to finish up.
Okay. Sure. I guess this is where maybe like a little music bumper would go.
Yeah.
And then I would say the outro.
So
right?
like, thanks very much for listening. We have a Patreon where you can pay the troll toll to see.
Oh, I did not write the script. I did not ask ChatGPT to include that we have a Patreon.
Oh, shit.
Do we have a Patreon?
No.
Yeah, we do. We literally do.
Thanks for listening to this episode of In the Skies of Love. We hope you enjoyed our discussion of Legend of the Galactic Heroes. If you have any comments or questions, please reach out to us at intheskiesoflove@gmail.com. That's intheskiesoflove@gmail.com. Thanks very much. I'm Ira Glass.
Horrible. Hope you enjoyed this program.
Tune in next time for our reviews of episode 3 and 4. Until then, we'll see you in the skies of love.